Chapter 3 lays out important basic science foundations so that we will be able to understand the material that we see in other chapters. While most people do not want to accept the idea that they need a little chemistry background, it is absolutely necessary in biology and in the understanding of environmental problems. We are faced with various forms of chemical pollution, with acidification of water resources and acid rain in parts of the United States, air pollution, climate change with respect to carbon dioxide levels, mercury levels in food which might become toxic, etc. Also, we need to understand how energy and chemicals flow through the environment and are transferred from the environment to various organisms, including human beings. Please read the case study at the beginning of this chapter and learn why the hypoxic zone exists in the Gulf of Mexico, which is a very important fishing area. This area here is at the end of the Mississippi water basin, and hypoxia is low oxygen environments. In San Diego, we just saw something similar with the red tide we experienced a month ago, which resulted in a hypoxic environment, killing large numbers of fish and creating a pretty amazing stench. Simple chemistry is important for environmental science students to know. These are some common molecules that are made from more than one chemical element. These different molecules are held together with various forms of bonds. Some are diatomic gases, hydrogen and oxygen, that we breathe, nitrogen in the air. These are called diatomic. Hydrochloric acid has a hydrogen and a chloride bound together. Water, which is important, most people know H2O, 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. Carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, again part of a pollutant. Nitrogen dioxide as well, 2 oxygens and a nitrogen. And then a fairly common gas with carbon at its core, 4 hydrogens, called methane, something that we would see in cow burps. It's important that you understand about acidity, acid-base balance, and this graphic will help you try to understand that. So you should know about what acid and base means. Absolutely pure water is given a value of 7 on an acid-base scale, which goes from 0 to 14. As the numbers get smaller than 7, it is more acidic, and the further away from 7 that you get, the stronger the acid. If the number is larger than 7, it is more alkaline or basic. And again, the further you get away from 7, the stronger the base. Each one of these lines is 10 times more than the one previous. So if we think about tomato juice has a pH of 4. Tomato juice is 1,000 times more acidic than pure water. An important chemical molecule in all living things is the DNA molecule, which codes for life. It has all the genetic information for that particular organism, and it is made out of simple chemistry. One of the concepts that I ask you to be aware of is energy. Energy may appear in many different forms. In your personal life, we know energy as auto fuel, the food we eat, electricity, and sunlight, for examples. In this photo, we see that the lake behind the waterfall is labeled potential energy. It is not doing much at the moment, but it has the potential to be converted into an alternate form of energy. As the water goes over the falls, it is labeled kinetic energy, the energy of motion. If you sat in the lake, the water doesn't do much. But if you try to stand in the waterfall, you would feel the force of the water beating down on your head. So energy can exist in different forms. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, but it can change forms. At home, when you flip on a light switch, electricity is converted to light, energy, and heat. The most dominant power source for life on Earth comes from the sun. The sunlight is converted by plants and other photosynthetic organisms into organic molecules, like sugars, as one form of carbohydrate. Non-photosynthetic organisms like you and I need to use plants as food sources to fuel cellular metabolism, or what might be called cellular respiration. Here we see there are two parts to the photosynthetic reaction, which leads to creating the idea of the carbohydrates. We see the sun with photosynthesis making the conversion to carbohydrates and using and producing oxygen. The sugars and the oxygen are used by non-photosynthetic organisms like this rabbit, and they undergo something called respiration. Respiration in this case isn't just breathing, it's cellular respiration. It's using oxygen and carbon sources as a way to convert to energy. That energy then is expired away with water vapor. Carbon dioxide is released back into the air, where it can be picked up by photosynthetic plants and recycled. And this was a simple part of what's called a food chain. Now, energy flow through an ecosystem is a very complex matter and rarely linear, and is more often like a food web that we see here. So we see down at this level the organisms that are able to convert sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water into organic molecules. And they are called primary producers or autotrophs. Autotrophs mean self-feeders. They are fed on by what are known as the primary consumers. Things that eat vegetation are also known as herbivores. So we see that we have insects, we have certain kinds of ruminants that feed on the plant material. Those organisms, the primary consumers, are fed on by secondary consumers, carnivores. And so these carnivores make their living by eating primary consumers, which make their living by eating primary producers or autotrophs. And at the top of the web, you see that we have top carnivores, organisms like lions and cheetahs, where they have really no predators preying on them, so they are known as top carnivores. So you'll notice we go from the producers, the autotrophs, to the different kinds of heterotrophs, starting with primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Now, as energy is passed to the primary consumers, to the heterotrophs, they use photosynthesis to convert that into organic molecules. Those organic molecules are fed upon by the primary consumers, the herbivores, and then the secondary consumers, and maybe another level, or it could even be more levels beyond that. What also happens to all these components when they die is that there are decomposers that will feed on them, both the producers and the consumers, and they will return their raw materials back to Earth to be recycled. Now, one thing about feeding levels that I want you to be aware of, and it's important that you know that as we move up trophic levels, as we go from producers to herbivores to primary carnivores to top carnivores, we average moving about 10%, only about 10% of the energy available to the next level. What that means is if you think about this in terms of productivity, 100 pounds of grass consumed by the herbivores would result in the herbivores gaining only 10 pounds of weight. If the herbivores are then, a 10-pound herbivore is then fed on by a primary carnivore, only 10% of that goes forward, and so that primary carnivore would only gain 1%, one pound of the material, 10% up. And then if it was actually fed on by a secondary carnivore, then a 1 pound prey item would result in only 1/10 of a pound of weight gain for the top carnivore. So it's important you understand that there's 10% transferred up each one of these trophic levels. And you kind of see it played out here again, in that we have top carnivores feeding on primary carnivores, feeding on herbivores, and feeding on producers. So an interesting question to answer is, where is it cheaper to feed? And if you know something about shopping at the store, if you feed and buy herbivores, most of the meat that we buy are going to be cows, chickens. That's more expensive than buying plant material. If for some reason you're going to buy a primary or secondary carnivore, like let's say salmon, it's even more expensive because it takes so much resource in order for it to get to that high level.